Section 3. Qualia part of mind, not consciousness. This seems to me a much more flexible and realistic account of acquired tastes than Dennett's rather cumbersome one, which we saw in Unit 5. Dennett argued that via culture, inbuilt alarms and attractions can become combined and blended into more sophisticated tastes and aversions. They get, quote, co-opted in a host of more complicated organizations, built from millions of associations and shaped in the human case by thousands of memes, end quote. But these changes require the construction of some countervailing coalition to keep, for example, aversion from winning, quote. The resulting semi-stable tension can then itself become an acquired taste, to be sought out under certain conditions, end quote. Not a very parsimonious explanation. Damasio moves on to the question of how the brain produces what he calls the Qualia 1 effect. He describes a parallel response to incoming sensory stimuli by the brain. Firstly, the devices and regions map and display the incoming sensory information. Secondly, he says, quote, the brain is equipped with a variety of structures that respond to signals from those maps by producing emotions. Damasio then adds, quote, out of which arise subsequent feelings, end quote. I follow Panksepp in holding that this second feeling or consciousness stage of emotion is an illusion. In other words, the deep structures of the brain that Damasio refers to in this context, what he calls hot buttons, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and an array of nuclei in the basal forebrain and the brain stem, in fact, produce conscious emotions directly without requiring this second feeling stage. Apart from this difference, Damasio's account thus far virtually mirrors the learning and behavioral flexibility theory of Qualia, which I presented in the previous unit. However, Damasio then goes on to claim that his Qualia 1 do not, in fact, occur in consciousness at all, but should really be classified as part of the mind. He says that in a normal conscious state, there are a number of objects to be known, rarely one, but consciousness hardly ever accords equal conscious space and equal time to every object. Damasio states that, quote, part of the process of according different values to different images relies on the emotions they provoke and the feelings that ensue in the background of the conscious field, the subtle but not discardable Qualia 1 response. This is why, although the Qualia issue is traditionally regarded as part of the consciousness problem, I believe it belongs more appropriately under the mind rubric. Qualia 1 responses concern objects being processed in the mind and add another element to the mind, end quote. He describes this process as, quote, an ordering of images, best described as a spontaneous form of editing, end quote. Damasio adds that he does not, therefore, regard the Qualia 1 problem as a mystery. Again, this denial of the immediate and direct consciousness of initial qualia is a major point of difference from the Pancept-inspired theory I've been presenting. Damasio next attempts to deal with the Qualia 2 problem. As before, this poses, he says, an even more perplexing question, namely, quote, why should perceptual maps, which are neural and physical events, feel like anything at all? End quote. Damasio begins his explanation with the primordial feelings. These feeling states, he says, should be regarded as the foundation of both the mind and the self. The primordial feelings describe the state of the organism's interior. These feelings describing the state of the organism's state accompany the brain's perceptual maps. So, in order to explain why these maps, which are in themselves nothing but neural and physical events, then we must first explain the origin of these feelings, which always occur together with the maps. Damasio starts his attempt to explain primordial feelings by stating that, quote, feeling states first arise from the operation of a few brainstem nuclei that are highly interconnected among themselves and that are the recipients of highly complex integrated signals transmitted from the organism's interior, end quote. These signals from the body and the nervous system's response to them are part of the process of regulating life, part, in fact, of the process of homeostasis, though Damasio doesn't use the term in this context. The activity of the brainstem nuclei transforms the body's signals. Damasio continues that, quote, the transformation is further enhanced by the fact that the signals occur in a looped circuit whereby the body communicates to the central nervous system and the latter responds to the body's messages. The signals are not separate from the organism's states where they originate, end quote.